Dear listener, before we begin, let me wish you happiness, love, and well-being, as if you were the closest person to me. May each new day bring you warmth, comfort, and faith in a better future. Today, I will tell you a story that changed my life forever. A story of pain, betrayal, broken promises, and despite it all, hope for a new life. I remember that ominous night as if it happened yesterday. It was an ordinary autumn evening, with a cold wind tapping on the windows and rain relentlessly drumming on the roof. I was returning home from work, tired but full of anticipation for the evening with my loved one. Thoughts of how nice it would be to spend the evening in the arms of the person I considered my rock and friend flashed through my mind. But fate had other plans. I opened the bedroom door and froze in place. Before my eyes was a scene I would never forget. There, in the dim light of the nightlight, he stood, naked, but not alone. The room was filled with indescribable tension, a mix of passion and betrayal that tore my heart to pieces. For a moment, I couldn't believe my eyes. How could something I always thought impossible have happened? My body trembled from the cold and pain, and my thoughts swirled in a whirlpool of confusion and rage. In those seconds, time seemed to stop. I remember how my legs gave out, and I, as if in a trance, slowly sank to my knees, unable to hold back the tears that began to stream down my cheeks. Memories of our first meetings, of how it all began so beautifully, flashed through my mind. I was born in a small town where everyone knew each other, and dreams seemed pure and real. From an early age, I had a burning desire to love and be loved, to believe that I would meet someone with whom I could share all the joys and sorrows of life. Fate smiled on me when I met him, Alexei. His eyes, full of mystery and promises, captivated me from the first glance. We met at a party with mutual friends, and in that moment I believed this was it, the real feeling that would melt the ice in my heart. Our relationship developed rapidly. Every meeting was filled with laughter, whispers of tenderness, and plans for the future. I remember how he would take my hand during walks along the embankment, how we sat in a small cafe listening to music from the old days, and it seemed like the whole world was made for us. But, as often happens, behind the mask of perfect love, the first barely noticeable cracks began to appear. At first, I didn't pay attention to the small oddities. Late-night calls, excuses about work meetings, brief disappearances. Deep down, I believed it was all temporary, that love was stronger than any circumstances. However, with each passing day, something began to change. I started to notice how his behavior became distant at times, how his voice carried hints of secrecy and mystery. These small details, seemingly insignificant, gradually turned into an overwhelming stream of doubt and anxiety. One evening, as the rain tapped on the windows and I sat in our cozy living room trying to read a book, a quiet but persistent voice of reason spoke in my head. Something's not right here. And indeed, several small details suddenly came together to form a sinister picture. He often stayed out late, and his phone was always with him, even when we were together. At first, I brushed these thoughts aside, attributing them to fatigue and the trivialities of life. But gradually the doubts began to eat away at me from the inside. Our conversations became increasingly strained. I tried to ask him directly, but he always assured me that everything was fine, that it was just work and my unnecessary worries. I felt like I was creating non-existent stories in my head, and I began to blame myself for letting fear take over. But the anxiety wouldn't let go, like a persistent shadow following me at every step. One day, when I saw him hurriedly hiding his phone in his pocket, I realized my fears were not unfounded. That same night, lying in the dark, I tried to catch even the slightest sound that could reveal the truth. With trembling hands, I dialed the numbers of acquaintances, searching for confirmation of my suspicions in the small details of his behavior. Every new little thing, every random fragment of conversation became pieces of a mosaic forming a picture from which there was no escape. Remembering our first months together, I couldn't believe how carelessly I had accepted his promises, how wholeheartedly I had believed in our love. We dreamed of a future together, made plans, discussed how one day we would buy a house by the lake, how we would spend long evenings listening to the sound of the wind in the trees. Those dreams now seemed like an illusion, a mirage that vanished under the weight of reality. I remember how one day, sitting in the dimly lit kitchen, I heard a voice that was painfully familiar. It was a quiet but determined phone call that he always ignored. The screen displayed the name of a woman I had never seen before, but the voice on the other end of the line was filled with tenderness and care. My heart clenched with pain and anxiety, and images of betrayal, which I had tried so hard to ignore, flashed through my mind. But let me return to the day when everything seemed perfect. Alexei and I met in the spring, when everything was blooming and the world seemed full of hope. His manners, his genuine laughter, his warmth, it all captivated me completely. I remember how we walked through the sunlit streets of the old town, how he told me about his dreams, and I, like a child, listened to every word, believing that our union would last forever. In those moments, I didn't even think that behind this brilliance could lie deception and lies. Our conversations were always filled with music, not just the kind playing on the old record player, but the melody of our hearts beating in unison. We laughed together, dreamed together, made plans, not noticing the first signs of trouble. Sometimes, waking up early in the morning, I would admire his peaceful sleep, feeling how love filled every cell of my being. But now I understand that even the sweetest dreams can turn into nightmares. With each passing day, I began to notice more and more small inconsistencies. His gaze became distant, and our conversations short and superficial. One day, when I caught him on the phone, I heard him whispering words full of tenderness and affection, words he had never directed at me. My heart began to race, and I felt everything inside me turn upside down. These moments, like icy drops, slowly seeped into my soul, leaving behind painful scars. I had to face what I had always tried to ignore, the feeling that I was no longer the center of his world. The internal struggle between faith and doubt tore me apart. Every night I asked myself, how could such a betrayal happen? It seemed to me that all our happy memories had turned into lies, and I stood in front of the mirror, not recognizing myself in the reflection. My hands trembled as I tried to understand where I had gone wrong, why I had trusted him with my heart, which turned out to be so fragile and vulnerable. In those days, I couldn't sleep at night, replaying every little detail in my head, trying to piece together the unclear fragments of the truth. Every sound, every movement in the house made me anxious. Even the most ordinary rustle behind the wall turned into an ominous signal of an impending catastrophe. I started keeping a diary, writing down every suspicious event, every note of his inconsistency, hoping to find some pattern in this chaos. One day, when the rain intensified and the cold pierced me to the bone, I found myself at the epicenter of my fears. Sitting in the dark, I cried quietly, hugging myself, and thought about how it had come to this. How the love that had seemed eternal to me had turned into a source of endless pain. It felt like life itself was cruelly playing with my emotions, leaving me alone in the abyss of betrayal and loneliness. And then, on that very night, when my doubts reached their peak, fate cruelly decided to open my eyes. I didn't know that at that moment, I was about to face the fateful event that would change everything forever. I left my room like a lost soul, wandering through the house in search of some proof of his infidelity. Every room was filled with echoes of past joys, but now everything seemed alien and cold. Suddenly, I heard a sound that made me freeze. A quiet, almost imperceptible knock coming from the bedroom. My heart began to race, and my mind worked at full capacity. With trembling and uncertainty, I approached the door, realizing that behind it lay the truth I had been trying to avoid for so long. With a trembling hand, I reached for the handle, and at that moment, everything around me froze, as if waiting for an inevitable catastrophe. As I opened the door, I couldn't have imagined what I would see. Alexei, standing in the center of the room, as if lost in his own dream, and a strange woman, tenderly clinging to him. My soul was filled with horror and despair, and time seemed to stretch into infinity. I felt everything inside me crumble, as if the invisible walls of my world were cracking under the pressure of the inevitable truth. My heart clenched with pain, and the words I had wanted to say for so long got stuck in my throat. In that second, I realized that my life would never be the same again. It felt as if a heavy silence hung in the air, broken only by occasional agonizing sighs and the soft whispers of betrayed hopes. I couldn't hold back my scream, and it echoed through the house, announcing that it was all over. In the hours that followed, I tried to piece together the fragments of my broken heart. My mind struggled with reality, trying to find an explanation for what had happened. Every second felt like an eternity, and the pain inside seemed insurmountable. I sought comfort in memories of happier days, trying to believe that this was just a terrible nightmare from which I would soon wake up. But the truth was relentless, and each new realization shattered my illusions like hammer blows on thin glass. I remember sitting in our small kitchen, trying to stifle my tears as I looked at family photos where Alexei and I seemed so happy. Every image, every smile now felt like a cruel joke from fate. Why? Why me? I futilely asked the universe, trying to find even a grain of meaning in this nightmare. It raced through my head. Maybe I had been too blind, too trusting. Maybe I had contributed to this tragedy by ignoring the early signs of trouble. My inner torment reached its limit, and I felt the need to act. I began gathering evidence, analyzing every call, every message left on his phone. Days and nights blended into an endless wait for the truth, which seemed to always be hidden behind a veil of deception. Sometimes I tried to talk to him, asking questions that I thought might reveal the essence of what was happening, but his answers were cold and detached, as if he had long since decided to live in a world where I no longer mattered. In those moments, it felt like everything around me was losing its color. The house, once filled with laughter and love, had turned into a cold space where every corner screamed of betrayal. Even the sounds, the quiet dripping of the old faucet, the creak of the floor under my feet, the rustle of leaves outside the window, all became reminders that my life had descended into a living hell. I tried to find solace in conversations with friends, but even there I encountered indifference and misunderstanding. No one could truly grasp the depth of my pain. No one could understand how hard it was to accept that the person I had trusted most had betrayed me. Sometimes it felt like I was alone in this abyss of suffering. But deep down, I knew that somewhere within me a resolve was growing. A resolve not to break, but to find the strength to rise and start a new life. On one of those long nights, when the pain was unbearable, I accidentally found a notebook on his desk, filled with strange entries. These were thoughts, plans, perhaps even dreams. But now I realized that they belonged to someone else. Reading those lines, I felt chills run down my spine, and my heart pounded in rhythm with the painful realization. Every word was like a knife, plunging into my soul and leaving a deep wound with no path to healing. I tried to find logical explanations, asking myself, when did it all go wrong? What little things did I ignore that could have revealed the truth? These reflections brought no comfort, only intensifying the feeling of loneliness and betrayal. An inner voice told me it was time to act, to find out the truth once and for all, even if it was bitter and destructive. During those hours, I sat by the window, watching the rain wash away the remnants of daylight, and thought about how sometimes life throws challenges at us to teach us to be stronger. But the strength I dreamed of seemed unattainable when you're faced with a living hell. I knew that difficult decisions lay ahead, and each one would be a step down an unknown path, leading me to stop being a victim of my own fears. From that moment on, my inner transformation began, a journey filled with agonizing doubts, anxiety, and the determination to find a strength within myself that I had never suspected. Despite the pain and disappointment, I knew I had to fight, not just for the truth, but for my dignity, for the chance to feel the taste of life again, for the opportunity to rediscover myself. When I closed the bedroom door, the echo of my screams still rang in the empty hallway, and my heart pounded as if trying to escape my chest. The pain burning me with every second was not just physical. It was a storm of betrayal that had engulfed every part of my soul. The next day, I woke up in a state of numbness, as if the world had ceased to exist, and I was trapped between a past full of sweet memories and a present dominated by deceit and bitterness. Sitting on the edge of the bed, I tried to gather my thoughts. Moments that had once seemed insignificant flashed through my mind. The cold look, the evasive answers, the phone he always kept close. That night, I realized that the love I had given so unconditionally had turned into a cold poison. A resolve to find the truth flared up within me like a fire in the darkness, and I knew that continuing to live in the prison of delusions was no longer an option. I began by secretly going through his things, sorting through stacks of papers and magazines, hoping to find even the slightest hint of what was happening behind my back. Every line I found, every random note in the notebook became fragments of a horrifying mosaic. Why did you deceive me? Where is the love I believed in with all my heart? Echoed in my head like the remnants of long-forgotten screams. My hands trembled as I discovered messages full of tenderness and affectionate words addressed to a strange woman. In every word, I felt the painful betrayal, and my heart seemed to shatter into 1,000 pieces. The unbearable pain mixed with rage, and I knew I had to act before it was too late. Over the next few days, I kept a diary, writing down every detail, every thought that crept into my mind. In those moments, I found solace in the honesty of my words, as if trying to build a bridge between my past and future life. But besides the diary, I sought support from my friends, hoping to find understanding and comfort in their words. Marina, I can't believe that everything I thought about us turned out to be a lie, I whispered, my voice filled with despair, when I met with my longtime friend one day. It's awful, but remember, dear, you're stronger than you think. Don't let the pain destroy you. She comforted me, hugging me so tightly as if to banish the darkness of betrayal. Her words were a lifeline, easing the suffocating grip of pain, if only slightly. But inside, the storm still raged. I spent sleepless nights scrolling through messages, rereading our old photos, and reminiscing about moments when everything seemed so carefree. Every new piece of evidence of his infidelity, every line of correspondence became a blade, tearing my heart apart. One day, gathering all the fragility I had accumulated, I decided to have the conversation that would change our lives forever. The evening was rainy and cold, almost like the feeling that overwhelmed me when I realized all my illusions had been shattered. We sat in the living room, where laughter had once echoed, but now a heavy silence reigned. His eyes, usually filled with warmth, were now cold and distant. I clutched an envelope containing printed messages and photos, proof of his betrayal. How could you, Alexei? I burst out, my voice filled with such a cry that every word carried not only pain, but also immense disappointment. What do you mean? His voice was calm, but there was a note of weariness in it. Don't lie to me, I continued, unable to hold back the flood of tears. I found everything, the messages, the photos. You betrayed me, our love, everything I believed in. You. He fell silent, his eyes searching for a gaze that could explain, justify, even partially, all of this. But there were no justifications. At that moment, words became useless. My mind was engulfed in chaos, a series of memories, bright moments of happiness, instantly replaced by the pain of betrayal. I remembered how we used to laugh together, how we dreamed of the future. Now, standing before me, was the man I had loved with all my heart, who had turned out to be capable of destroying it all with a single lie. I can't live in this darkness anymore, I whispered, feeling an unyielding resolve growing within me. I deserve the truth. I deserve love that isn't masked by betrayal. Do you think I wanted to hurt you? His voice suddenly became hoarse. I tried to change something in myself, but it all turned out to be too complicated. Too complicated? I interrupted him bitterly. Or did you just stop loving me? Was I just a convenient comfort, a temporary respite from loneliness? His silence was the answer, and I realized that perhaps I would never know the true motives behind his actions. This realization only deepened my suffering. But it was in that moment, when it seemed like all bridges had been burned, that I felt a spark of new strength ignite within me, a strength that could help me rise from the ashes of a destroyed love. The following days were filled with an ongoing struggle with myself. Every morning, I woke up feeling empty, as if I had lost a part of my soul. But during the sleepless nights spent in contemplation by the window, I began to realize I couldn't remain a prisoner of pain. In this darkness, there's a chance to be reborn. I must find the strength to move forward, even if everything seems destroyed, I repeated to myself, watching the raindrops slide down the window. I began gathering information, analyzing every piece of evidence I found, searching not only for signs of his infidelity, but also for answers to the questions that tormented me. New plans began to form in my mind, plans for a life without lies, for a world where I could regain my dignity. Every time fear gripped me, I remembered Marina's words and silently vowed to myself, I won't let this pain break me. Occasionally, when I walked through the corners of our home, I saw reflections of the past, the tenderness when we laughed together, when I dreamed of our future. Now, those places felt like sanctuaries of lost hope, but in every corner, I began to notice a small glimmer of light, a sign that even in the deepest shadows of betrayal, a new life could emerge. On one of those gloomy days, I found the strength to write a letter that would be the first step toward freedom from pain and lies. I wrote, as if pouring my soul onto the paper. Dear me, perhaps you'll never know the price I had to pay to realize the truth. I will no longer be your toy, your weakness. I take my fate into my own hands and begin a new life where betrayal has no power over me. Today, I forgive myself for all the blindness, for all the moments when I believed in lies. Today, my journey to healing begins. When I finished the letter, I felt something shift inside me, as if a long-locked door had finally cracked open, allowing light to seep into the dark corners of my heart. Days passed, and I began to notice how one emotion gradually replaced another in my mind. Before, every sound, every rustle reminded me of pain, but now I heard not only echoes of the past, but also harbingers of a new life. It was a difficult struggle. I fought my fears, the constant guilt for not seeing the truth sooner. In moments when loneliness and despair threatened to take over, I found solace in simple things. The aroma of freshly brewed tea, the soft light of the morning sun, the quiet whisper of the wind outside the window. These small moments reminded me that life goes on, and that despite all the trials, an inexhaustible source of strength still lay within me. One day, sitting in my favorite chair with a book in my hands, I suddenly realized I'm no longer the woman who allowed herself to drown in pain. I must become the one who rises from the ashes, who, having accepted all her wounds, finds a new life. This thought, like a quiet but resolute call, changed everything. My heart filled with pain, began to fill with resolve, and a dream of a future where I would be the creator of my own destiny. I knew that difficult trials lay ahead, that the past wouldn't retreat so easily, but I was ready to face this challenge. Every new chapter of my life promised to be unlike the previous one. I decided that I would never again allow pain and deceit to overshadow the light that burned so brightly within me. Time passed, and one day, as I sat in a small cafe watching the rain wash the dust off the city streets, a stranger approached me. Her gaze was penetrating, and her voice carried a gentle care. She told me that she too had gone through betrayal and pain, and her words became a confirmation. In every ending lies the beginning of something new. "You're not alone," she said, her eyes sparkling with sympathy and understanding. "Every wound, every tear, it's a step toward becoming stronger. Believe me, inside you already lives the woman who can turn pain into strength and start a new life where there's no place for deceit and betrayal." Her words resonated with me like a soothing melody, awakening an inner energy I had long forgotten. And in that moment, looking into the eyes of this stranger, I felt that it was time to believe in myself, in the woman who had withstood the storm of betrayal and found the strength to move forward. Several weeks had passed since that evening when I confronted Alexei with the truth. Time flowed strangely. It would freeze in the silence of lonely nights, then slip through my fingers during moments of introspection and pain. But the most important thing was that I was no longer the same. I felt something changing inside me. If before I had tried to understand him, to find excuses, now there was no room for illusions in my heart. One morning, as the sun broke through the curtains, I got out of bed and looked at my reflection for the first time in a long while. My eyes were tired, but they no longer held the emptiness that had settled there on the day of the betrayal. I decided to start a new life. The first step was what I had feared most, letting go of the past. I packed his things into a box without trembling hands or pain in my chest. It was a symbolic gesture, but it held great significance for me. I no longer wanted to live in a world where his scent still lingered in the air, where his shadow haunted me in every corner of the apartment. I called Marina. "I'm going to throw a girls' night," I declared, smiling for the first time in a long while. "That's the spirit," she laughed. "Does this mean you're finally coming back to life?" I didn't know if it could be called a return. Rather, it was the first step towards something new. At the girls' night, I felt almost free. We laughed, talked about the future, made plans, and then something happened that I never expected. When I stepped onto the restaurant terrace to get some fresh air, a man approached me, tall, confident, with a slight smile on his lips. "You don't seem to be fully relaxed here," he remarked, studying me with his gaze. "Something bothering you?" I was slightly surprised by his directness. "Can you just let go of the past like that?" I asked. "Of course, it's just a matter of choice." His words struck a chord with me. I didn't know who he was, but in that moment, I felt that perhaps the world hadn't closed all its doors to me. I thought I had already left everything behind, but fate had other plans. A few days later, Alexei called me. "We need to talk." His voice sounded muffled, as if he had realized he had lost something important. I met him at a cafe. He looked haggard. His eyes, once full of self-assurance, now reflected confusion. I made a mistake," he said, rubbing his temples. "I don't know what came over me. I got lost." "Lost?" I scoffed bitterly. You didn't get lost, Alexei. You made a choice. And that choice wasn't me. He looked at me with pain. I want to fix everything. I sighed. There were no more tears, no more screams. Only the realization that this man no longer had any power over my life. It's too late, I said calmly. I'm letting you go. I stood up and walked away, leaving him alone with his regrets. My dear friends, if you're standing before the same pain I once faced, know this. It's not the end. It's the beginning of a new story. The pain will fade, the tears will dry, and in their place will come strength. The strength to keep living, to love yourself, and to not fear the future. Life goes on, and it's beautiful. If my story resonates with you, subscribe and share it. Let every woman who has experienced betrayal know that she's not alone, and that happiness awaits her. Several months passed. I felt different. Not the broken woman who didn't know how to go on, but strong, confident, and free. Was I scared? Yes. But fear no longer controlled me. After the conversation with Alexei, I finally closed the door on the past. And when I once saw him on the street, pale, dejected, with an empty gaze, I realized that his fate no longer had anything to do with me, and I kept living. I immersed myself in work, started traveling, surrounded myself with people who brought light into my life. And most importantly, I was no longer afraid to love. That man from the restaurant terrace, his name was Andre, gradually became a part of my life. We didn't rush, didn't dive in head first, but I looked forward to every meeting. He didn't ask about the past, didn't pressure me, didn't demand anything. He was just there. And one day, when he took my hand in the park, I realized that for the first time in a long while, I felt truly happy. "You're smiling," he said. "Yes, and I like this feeling." Sometimes pain isn't a punishment, but an opportunity to be reborn. Betrayal destroyed my old world, but in its place, I built a new one, stronger, brighter, and better. I'm no longer afraid of loneliness, no longer afraid to trust. And I know for sure that each of us deserves love, real love. My dear friends, if you're familiar with this pain, know this: it will pass, and something amazing awaits you. Believe in yourself, choose yourself, and life will surely reciprocate.